and a wonderful, wonderful life-saving, literally life-saving thing, because babies die for lack of breast milk. Most babies in developed countries are not going to die for lack of breast milk, because generally we have good, safe water, and generally babies are resilient enough to be able to handle the incredible ingredient list on something like this. But many babies can't. Many babies actually do not tolerate artificial baby milk, period. And those are particularly premature babies. And so those are the cases in the developed world where a pump with a mom who has a really significant premature baby can actually save that baby's life. It can prevent them from getting really serious complications in their intestines and other things like that, because it's actually what they're meant to have. So pumps are life-saving, and they certainly allow many, many more babies in the US and the developed world to have more breast milk. But then there's other issues like this whole thing is out of plastic, and are you then going to get all the BPA, DH, whatever, free plastic, which is going to be more expensive, and then you have to throw out your old stuff, and then where does plastic actually go? What is that doing to the next generation who have all this plastic? We know plastic is a whole other conversation, but definitely not a legacy we want to be leaving our children. And there's glass bottles, there's all this conversation which leads to more layers, more stress, more money stuff. So the breast pump is not necessarily like the ultimate be-all, end-all wonderful answer to this question, but it is certainly part of the question about work. And if anybody wants to try it, try it on their arm, see what a breast pump is like, we have it here. Not super comfortable, and definitely very, 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 very commonly brings up the question of, I feel like a cow. And it's actually kind of not very much thought out a lot of times when people say, I don't like pumping, I feel like a cow, I just want to use formula. Which means you feel like a cow, you just want to use formula, which means you're going to feed your baby from a cow. It's an interesting, this, what's in here actually belongs to a baby cow, and baby cow should be with mom cow, and that whole cycle, kind of goes differently, not quite how people think. So, another thing that you mentioned was breasts in the first place. And there's definitely been a huge back and forth about the acceptability of the breast in public for feeding a baby. And illustrated really, really beautifully right now on Facebook with this constant controversy and back and forth between Facebook, a social networking website that is huge, banning breastfeeding photos. They will mark it as porn, and they'll mark it as inappropriate and remove it. They'll delete it. It's no longer there for people to see. And then all of the people who believe that breastfeeding is a normal physiological process, that it is not sexual, or certainly not pornographic, and that it belongs in a place for people to see it, especially for maybe people who don't have that kind of experience seeing other people in real life nursing, to at least be able to see pictures of people nursing. And so it's a really good example right now of the Facebook breastfeeding wars, of the back and forth between Facebook pulling stuff and then people getting more and more, whatever they are, signatures or online petition things of Facebook breastfeeding photos aren't obscene. And one of my favorite little phrases right now going around in the email world is, if you don't like my breastfeeding, if you don't like watching me breastfeed, put a towel or a blanket over your head. Because what is expected in polite company is to put a towel, a blanket over the baby's head. And so, I think that's it. A really cute little one there, but.
Yeah, exactly.
And when we're in a place where we're looking at, generally, in a room like this, we're generally more or less supportive of breastfeeding. It's kind of funny, but where it comes from is not funny at all. And it comes from a lot of cultural factors and influences about the acceptability of feeding from the breast. And so, does anyone know anything about just really basically the history of breastfeeding in the U.S.? Kind of sort of when it stopped happening, sort of when it started coming back, and why? So, obviously, many years ago, all babies breastfed. And if their mother was one of the very small numbers of women who physiologically cannot produce milk, or if their mother died, or wasn't available to them for some reason, they would breastfeed with another woman. And they would breastfeed the breast. And so, speaking to this, the World Health Organization current guidelines about breastfeeding is that the first choice, health-wise, for any baby in the world, in the first world, in the third world, anywhere, is breastfeeding. The second choice is mom's express breast milk, which means with the pump, or if the pump isn't available, just by hand. And it's actually not that difficult to just express milk into a bottle or into something else. Third choice is another woman's milk. Fourth choice is artificial substitute. And I think that we always tend to think it goes straight from here to here. Like everyone knows, yeah, breast is best, blah, blah, blah. But if you can't do that, jump to this one. And actually the evidence and the consensus, in the World Health Organization and other big organizations is there's all these steps in between. And you don't just jump from here to here. So, obviously, sometime in the imaginary idyllic past, every baby breastfed and blah, blah, blah. And then with industrialization and with women entering the workforce in developed countries in 1700s, 1800s, and with people being expropriated from their land, or the expropriation of land. People no longer have their land, so then they have to work, and they have to work for wages. And so that whole economic process that moved people into the workforce, moved women into the workforce. And talk about not being able to breastfeed now. Try breastfeeding when you were working like a 12-hour day in an unlit factory that made textiles in the 1800s. I mean, absolutely not possible to breastfeed. And definitely also not access to something like this, which is at least pretends to be hygienic and has been pasteurized, even though you will find E. coli and lots of other nasty bacteria in this stuff. It's much safer than trying to take a gallon or a cup full of milk in the 1800s that who knows how long it's been sitting somewhere on a cart and then trying to feed it to your baby. Like, clearly this is hugely better than that. So we would have women who are working these ridiculous amounts of days away from their children, and they would have to feed something else. And so for a long time, basically, it would be mushed up bread and water and some milk, which obviously, nutritionally, is not what babies need. But somehow we all survived, and somehow people in the U.S. coming from that industrial reality, which tended to be white women and immigrant women in the U.S., survived. And then in other areas in the South, African-American women, both during the period when they were enslaved and then afterwards, would nurse their own babies, but more specifically would nurse white folks' babies. And so we had some wet nursing going on where someone else would nurse a baby, and we had some with this feeding of babies with really kind of disturbing combinations of basically white bread, water, and milk. So come along pediatricians. And doctors, doctors weren't a particularly impressive group of people as far as their relationship to science before the 1900s, and some would argue now, but at least until then. And so they didn't actually really have a lot of legitimacy for a question like, what do I feed my baby? No one would ever think to go to a doctor and ask a doctor what to feed a baby. That's not what a doctor's for. A doctor's for like cutting off a limb or something. But toward the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, doctors were starting to specialize. There were starting to be obstetricians, and there were starting to be surgeons, and there were starting to be pediatricians. And what the heck is a pediatrician going to do in the 1800s when there aren't antibiotics and there aren't, surgical techniques that actually work on children so the children don't die? The only really thing they had to offer was, what do you feed your kid? So they started coming up with all these really elaborate ways of, you mix exactly this much water with exactly this much milk and exactly this much sugar, and that's going to be the perfect formula for your baby. And that's where we come up with the term infant formula, is these pediatricians. And so gradually over time, the formulas would get more and less complicated, and you would go to your pediatrician, and your pediatrician